Your grandpa was just a squatter!
That's what Brandy Hutchwell screamed at my grandfather's funeral, while his casket was still being lowered into the ground. This 50-something fake blonde in a neon pink blazer stomped through the cemetery mud, pointing her press-on nail at my face, demanding I hand over the 900 acres Chester just left me. The smell of roses and fresh dirt hung in the October air as she shrieked about community property and how I didn't deserve $3 million worth of prime farmland. She called my war hero grandfather, who earned this land fighting in Vietnam and farming it for 60 years, a squatter, at his own funeral. Worst mistake of her life. Chester didn't just leave me land, he left me a legal nuclear bomb that would vaporize anyone dumb enough to try stealing from his family. What would you do? Drop your location below. I promise your HOA drama doesn't end with federal prison time. Let me back up and tell you how I got here. My name's Riley Thornfield. I'm 34, work remote IT consulting, and 3 months ago I was living in a cramped city apartment, visiting Grandpa Chester once a month like a dutiful grandkid. Now I'm standing in his farmhouse kitchen, breathing in the lingering smell of his pipe tobacco mixed with decades of coffee stains, trying to process inheriting what amounts to a small kingdom. Chester Thornfield raised me from age 8 after my parents died in a car crash. This man, Vietnam vet, built like an oak tree, hands rough as tree bark from 60 years of farming, taught me everything that mattered. Every summer evening we'd sit on that creaky front porch swing that groaned like an old ship, him smoking his pipe, teaching me that land isn't just dirt, it's legacy. The inheritance blindsided me. 900 acres, 400 of mature timber worth more than most people's houses, 300 of pasture that could feed half the county, and 200 including the homestead where Chester built his empire from nothing. The family lawyer confirmed what felt impossible. Nearly $3 million worth of property, owned free and clear. I spent that first week running my fingers through Chester's old surveyor maps, the paper edges worn soft as silk from decades of planning. The musty smell of his map cabinet mixed with machine oil from his old surveying equipment told the story of a man who measured twice and cut once. Then, Brandy Hutchwell slithered into paradise. She'd invaded Millbrook Falls 3 years ago, bought the biggest McMansion in Creekside Meadows subdivision, one of those plastic palaces with fake columns and a garage bigger than Chester's entire barn. Within 6 months, she'd crowned herself HOA president because nobody else wanted to referee her wine-fueled power trips. Here's what Brandy saw when she stared at Chester's land from her deck every morning, wine glass in hand at 10 a.m., dollar signs. She wanted to transform all that wasted farmland into a luxury golf resort. Condos, spas, the full suburban cancer treatment. The day after Chester's funeral, while I'm still figuring out which end of a cow eats grass, this woman files an official complaint with the county claiming Chester's will was suspicious, demands a full investigation into whether some unfit city boy deserves such valuable property. Then she really showed her class, planted a hit piece in the local newspaper suggesting I'd sell out to toxic waste companies, started her scare campaign about agricultural runoff poisoning subdivision wells, and property values plummeting due to farm noise. The absolute cherry on top, she Googled how to steal farmland legally on the library computer and forgot to clear her browser history. Our librarian, sweet Mrs. Patterson, screenshotted that search faster than you could say evidence and texted it to half the county. But here's where Brandy made her fatal mistake. She assumed I was some soft city kid who'd roll over at the first sign of trouble. What she couldn't know was that Chester hadn't just left me land. He'd spent 60 years building the perfect legal fortress, documenting everything, preparing for exactly this kind of vulture. See, Chester survived 3 tours in Vietnam and 40 years of drought, floods, and government bureaucrats trying to steal his land. He didn't just teach me farming, he taught me warfare. The woman wanted to turn Chester's legacy into another strip mall wasteland, where rich people could play pretend country life. His vision was sustainable farming, supporting local families, preserving something real in a world drowning in plastic. Standing in that kitchen, surrounded by the smell of old wood and honest work, I made Chester a promise. Not 1 inch of his land would fall to some wannabe country queen with press-on nails and a fake smile. Little did I know, Brandy was just getting started. And unfortunately for her, so was I. Brandy's opening move hit like a sledgehammer wrapped in legal paperwork. 2 days after I buried Chester, I'm sitting in my pajamas trying to figure out how to work his ancient coffee machine. Thing groaned like a dying cow every morning, when the doorbell rings. Sheriff's deputy, official envelope. That sinking feeling in your gut when you know life just got complicated. Brandy had filed a lawsuit claiming Chester's will was forged, not questioned. Accused me of straight-up fraud. Her complaint, written by some shark lawyer from the state capitol, demanded the court investigate irregularities in the suspicious timing and convenient terms of the alleged will. The real gut punch? She'd convinced a judge to freeze everything. Temporary injunction meant I couldn't sell, couldn't develop, couldn't even cut firewood without court approval. My $3 million inheritance was locked up tighter than a tick on a hound dog. Sitting there with that legal document, I could almost smell the stale cologne of her fancy lawyer, hear the click of her heels as she strutted into the courthouse thinking she'd checkmated some dumb country kid. But Chester hadn't just taught me farming, he'd taught me patience and reconnaissance. While Brandy was busy celebrating, I took a page from Chester's old Army playbook. Gather intelligence before you strike. Drove to the courthouse, filed a Freedom of Information Act request for all HOA records, planning documents, financial statements. $47 well spent. Chester always said, the best investments come cheap. What I found in those files would have made Chester laugh until his sides split. Brandy hadn't stumbled into Millbrook Falls by accident. Email chains going back 2 years showed her coordinating with Millbrook Development Group before she even owned property here. The paper trail read like a military operation, target acquisition, timeline planning, asset evaluation, and there it was, buried in a draft email she'd been too careless to delete. Once we forced the sale, water rights transfer automatically with the deed. That's when I remembered something Chester had drilled into me during those long summer evenings on the porch. He'd pull out his old surveyor maps, pointing at the well markers with his pipe stem, explaining how water law worked in our county. First in time, first in right, Riley. That's how they settled the West, and it's still law today. Chester's 1962 well permit didn't just give us water, it gave us power over every drop that flowed through the subdivision. 40 years of legal precedents that trumped every fancy development plan Brandy could dream up. Without our water, her golf course was just expensive dirt. I called Brandy that evening, voice casual as sweet tea on Sunday. Hey neighbor, heard you're concerned about subdivision water quality. Funny thing happened when I was reviewing Chester's old permits. The silence stretched longer than a country mile. Turns out the whole subdivision is actually dependent on our well system. Chester's 1962 rights are senior to everything built after. Legally speaking, I could cut off water access tomorrow if I felt like it. The sound that squeaked through the phone reminded me of air leaking from a punctured tire. But hey, I continued, letting the implications sink in, I'm sure we can work something out, neighborly cooperation and all. That's when Brandy's mask slipped completely. Within 24 hours, she'd launched a reputation war that would have impressed Joseph Goebbels. Social media exploded with rumors about the unstable city boy who couldn't handle rural responsibility. Anonymous Yelp reviews claiming dangerous ranch conditions. Fake safety complaints flooding the county offices faster than she could type them. The woman even tried planning a newspaper story about me planning some toxic waste facility. The desperation smelled stronger than the manure pile behind Chester's barn. But here's what Brandy didn't understand about small communities. Loyalty runs deeper than her shallow schemes. Chester had spent 60 years building relationships with people who remembered when he came back from Vietnam with nothing but determination and a Purple Heart. Marcus Webb, the newspaper editor, had shared coffee with Chester every Tuesday for 2 decades. When he heard about Brandy's smear campaign, his journalist instincts kicked in like a bloodhound catching a scent. Dolores from the diner started tracking every suspicious meeting in her back booth. Buck at the hardware store, Chester's old Army buddy, began noting unusual supply purchases. Mrs. Patterson at the library kept tabs on who was using computers for research about property law. By week's end, I had my own intelligence network that would have made the CIA jealous. The texture of small-town justice feels different from city scheming, rougher around the edges, but honest as oak bark. While Brandy was playing chess with lawyers and money, I was building something more valuable. Community support rooted in 60 years of trust. She wanted war? Fine. But she was about to learn the difference between buying influence and earning respect. Brandy's next attack came dressed as civic duty, but it smelled like desperation mixed with her daily 10 a.m. wine breath. She'd somehow convinced the county to review our agricultural zoning. Suddenly, inspectors swarmed Chester's land like locusts with clipboards, measuring everything from chicken coop distances to the exact angle of our barn roof. The woman had turned bureaucracy into a weapon. Her masterpiece? Filing noise complaints about our rooster crowing at sunrise. In farm country, where roosters have been doing their job since before Columbus got lost looking for India. But the real slap in the face came when animal welfare investigators showed up with a county camera crew claiming anonymous reports of unsafe conditions. I'm standing there watching some soft-handed city inspector examine Chester's prize cattle like they were murder suspects, tasting that metallic bitterness that comes with pure rage. This witch was dragging my grandfather's 60-year reputation through the mud for her real estate fantasies. Time to get serious. I spent that weekend installing trail cameras around the property, the same ones Chester used for tracking deer, except now I was hunting a different kind of predator. Something he'd said while we were fixing fence one summer stuck with me. Riley, the best way to catch a thief is to watch where they think nobody's looking. 48 hours later, pay dirt. My cameras caught Brandy's pink Cadillac parked at our north gate at 11 p.m., her stumbling around with a flashlight like some bargain basement private investigator. She was photographing everything, water troughs, fence posts, even our compost pile, building a case file like CSI, Farmland Edition. But while she was playing amateur detective, I was doing real homework. Those HOA formation documents I'd been studying, pure comedy gold. Turns out Brandy's entire power structure was built on quicksand and wishful thinking. No proper state incorporation, no registered agent, no official voting procedures. Her board meetings were wine parties where she made decisions while her neighbors nodded along, too drunk or too polite to object. Chester used to laugh about contractors who'd try to shortcut the foundation work. Bad paperwork's like a house built on sand, Riley. Looks solid until you test it. Well, Brandy's legal authority was about as stable as a one-legged cat in a sandbox. Then my cameras caught something that made my blood pressure spike into the danger zone. 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. There's our HOA queen dumping something into Willow Creek, the same creek where county inspectors were scheduled to test water quality the next week. When I hiked down that morning, the whole section reeked like a paint factory had exploded. She'd poisoned our creek with industrial chemicals, then planned to blame Chester's farming operation for the contamination. The woman was literally manufacturing evidence to frame a dead war hero. I could have called the sheriff right then, but Chester had drilled patience into me like a drill sergeant. Instead, I kept watching, kept documenting. That acrid smell of paint thinner mixing with creek water and cattail roots became my daily reminder that some people have no bottom to their evil. Meanwhile, Brandy's public meltdown was providing free entertainment for half the county. Her social media rants got more unhinged by the day. Posts about outside agitators destroying community values and threats to boycott any business that dared support unfit inheritors over true residents. The sound of her voice shrieking across the valley during her daily phone campaigns to county officials became as regular as the evening cricket symphony. Even her own neighbors started closing windows when she wound up for another tantrum. But here's what Suburban Princess didn't understand about small towns. We have our own intelligence network that makes the NSA look like amateur hour. Buck started keeping receipts when she bought surveying equipment and no trespassing signs by the truckload. Dolores documented every whispered conversation in her diner's back corner booth. Mrs. Patterson tracked Brandy's library computer sessions. Turned out she was researching everything from environmental law to something called adverse possession, which is basically legal theft with extra steps. The woman was planning total warfare against our property rights using every sleazy loophole Google could teach her. What Brandy couldn't buy or bully was what Chester had spent 60 years earning, genuine respect. While she was trying to purchase influence with threats and Chardonnay, I was inheriting relationships built on handshake deals and mutual aid. That community support felt like Chester's old work gloves, weathered and rough, but absolutely reliable when the work got hard. Every farmer who'd borrowed Chester's equipment, every neighbor he'd helped through drought years, every teenager he'd taught to drive stick shift was now watching this carpetbagger try to steal what their friend had built. She wanted to escalate? Perfect. But now she was fighting on Chester's turf, by Chester's rules, against Chester's people. And Chester's people don't lose to bullies, ever. Brandy's third assault hit me right in the wallet, the one place where even tough guys cry. I'm sitting at Chester's kitchen table, coffee going cold, staring at a property tax bill that looked like a phone number, $47,000. The county had reassessed our land at highest and best use, meaning they were taxing dirt like it was already a luxury resort. Due in 60 days, or foreclosure proceedings would begin. The smell of panic sweat mixed with Chester's lingering pipe tobacco as reality hit me like a freight train. They couldn't steal what you owned outright, but they could sure as hell tax you into bankruptcy. That's when Chester's voice echoed from those summer porch talks. The government's got more ways to skin a cat than you can shake a stick at, Riley, but they also got rules they have to follow, whether they like it or not. I spent that night digging through Chester's old filing cabinet, the metal beast that groaned like a dying cow every time you opened a drawer. Buried under decades of receipts and warranties, I found his Veterans Benefits folder, thick as a small-town phone book. Chester had filed for homestead exemption years ago but never needed to activate it. Military veterans got special protection against property speculation taxes, something about not letting the homeland steal from those who defended it. One phone call to the county assessor, one faxed form that Chester had filled out in 1987, and that crushing tax bill dropped 60%. From financial ruin to manageable payments, just like that. Chester had been playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. But while I was learning tax law the hard way, I decided it was time for professional backup. Chester's life insurance, $25,000 he'd kept for when the wolves come calling, bought me the best private investigator money could hire. Jake Morrison's office smelled like burnt coffee and justice. Former FBI agent who specialized in white-collar fraud, the kind of guy who could find dirt on a soap salesman. What Jake uncovered in 72 hours would have made Chester howl with laughter. Brandy Hutchwell was about as real as a $3 bill. Born Brandy Hutchison in Oklahoma, bankruptcy court regular, name-changing professional who'd pulled this exact scam in 3 states. Her method was simple. Target elderly rural landowners, create legal chaos, partner with development vultures, disappear before the lawsuits started flying. Her LinkedIn still claimed she was a landscape consultant. Apparently planting one half-dead rosebush in her front yard qualified her as a rural beautification expert. The woman had about as much landscaping experience as I had performing brain surgery. But here's where it got interesting. Jake's investigation revealed Brandy's master plan, and it was more twisted than a mountain road. She wasn't just trying to force a cheap sale. She was planning to steal our land using something called adverse possession, basically legal theft for patient criminals. The scheme was diabolical in its simplicity. Use legal harassment to drive me off the property, establish caretaker occupation through her development partners, maintain continuous presence for 7 years, then file for ownership based on abandonment. 7 years of squatting to steal $3 million, all perfectly legal if nobody fought back. Meanwhile, my small-town intelligence network was delivering information that would make the CIA jealous. Dolores tracked suspicious meetings between Brandy and men in $1,000 suits who paid for coffee with corporate credit cards. Buck documented her purchases of professional surveying equipment, way beyond what any real homeowner would need. Mrs. Patterson delivered the smoking gun, library computer records showing Brandy researching quiet title actions and landowner abandonment proceedings. The woman had been studying legal theft like it was her college major. But the most chilling discovery came from Jake's financial investigation. Brandy's development partners had already sold pre-construction condos worth $80 million, banking on guaranteed acquisition of Chester's land. $80 million in investor money, riding on stealing from a dead war veteran. The audacity took my breath away faster than stepping into Chester's old root cellar on a hot day. Sitting on that creaky porch swing that evening, reviewing Jake's report by lamplight, I felt something shift inside me. The texture of real anger feels different from simple frustration. Rougher, more focused, like sandpaper against raw wood. Brandy had underestimated 2 things: Chester's strategic preparation and the power of a community that remembered what loyalty meant. She thought she was playing against some grief-stricken city kid who'd fold at the first sign of trouble. What she couldn't know was that Chester had spent 60 years building relationships based on handshake deals and mutual respect, creating an army of allies who didn't appreciate carpetbaggers trying to steal from their friends. Chester always said the best defense was knowing your enemy better than they knew themselves. Time to prove that dead men could still win wars. The nuclear bomb that would vaporize Brandy's dreams was hiding in Chester's recipe box. I'm cleaning out his kitchen drawers, sorting through 60 years of accumulated memories, when I accidentally knock over this dented metal tin that had been camouflaged behind the salt shaker since the Carter administration. Recipe cards exploded across the linoleum like oversized confetti. Dolores's apple pie, Christmas ham glaze, hangover cure soup. And there, folded smaller than a prayer card between Sunday pot roast and Depression-era cornbread, was a piece of yellowed legal paper that made my heart stop. Perpetual Agricultural Covenant, 1962. The document felt fragile as butterfly wings in my trembling hands, but the words were clear as crystal. Should the current owner or any successor attempt to alter the agricultural designation of said property for commercial, residential, or recreational development purposes, ownership shall immediately revert to the state for perpetual conservation. Every single acre. Forever. Chester hadn't just bought farmland in 1962. He'd bought a legal time bomb with a 60-year fuse, and Brandy had been dancing on the trigger for months. The smell of old paper mixed with lingering pipe tobacco hit me like a religious revelation. Chester had known this day would come. I called Harlan Becker, Chester's lawyer, my voice cracking like a teenager's. "Harlan, I just found something that changes everything." "The Agricultural Covenant?" He chuckled like he'd been waiting for this call his whole career. "Wondered when you'd discover Chester's masterpiece. That document's been sitting in state files for 60 years, just waiting for some fool to try rezoning his land." The implications crashed over me like a cold wave. Any attempt to rezone would trigger automatic reversion. The state would get the land for free, developers would get nothing, and Brandy would get bankruptcy court. But Jake Morrison's investigation had uncovered an even juicier detail that would have made Chester howl with laughter. Millbrook Development Group, Brandy's secret partners, had already sold $80 million worth of pre-construction condos to investors. $80 million in contracts promising guaranteed lakefront luxury living and secured development rights. Brandy had personally signed guarantees that land acquisition was a done deal. If the development failed, she owed $2 million in personal liability to investors who'd trusted her promises. $2 million she was borrowing against a property that could never be developed. The woman was financially naked and didn't even know it. Jake's financial forensics painted a picture of spectacular stupidity. Brandy was living off hedge fund advance money, leasing that ridiculous pink Cadillac, even renting the furniture in her McMansion. She had about as much real wealth as a lottery ticket that hadn't been scratched yet. But here's the beautiful irony that would have made Chester proud enough to dance a jig. Every legal action Brandy had filed, every zoning challenge, every development application, every environmental complaint was building the exact paper trail needed to prove intent to develop. The more she fought for rezoning, the stronger the case became for triggering Chester's covenant. She was literally constructing her own legal execution. Sitting at Chester's kitchen table that evening, holding his 60-year insurance policy in hands that smelled like old paper and justice, I finally grasped the full scope of my grandfather's strategic genius. He hadn't just protected the land. He'd created a trap so perfect that any greedy vulture who tried to steal it would destroy themselves in the process. The texture of ultimate victory feels smooth as silk and twice as satisfying. Chester had spent decades preparing for this exact moment, knowing that eventually some carpetbagger would try to steal what he'd built. And when they did, they'd trigger their own annihilation. The war was about to end, and Brandy still thought she was winning. Time to assemble my war council and build the perfect trap for a wannabe land thief. First recruit, Harlan Becker, Chester's constitutional lawyer who'd been sharpening his legal claws for 60 years waiting for this fight. The man was 70-something with eyes like a hungry eagle and a smile that promised courtroom bloodshed. He'd been Chester's poker buddy since Vietnam and knew that some battles are worth savoring like fine whiskey. "Riley," he said, settling into his leather chair that groaned like Chester's barn door, "your grandfather didn't just leave you land. He left you a legal nuclear weapon, and all we need to do is hand Brandy the detonator." Second ally, Marcus Webb from the county newspaper, an investigative bloodhound who'd shared Tuesday morning coffee with Chester for 2 decades. The man could smell corruption from 3 counties away, and the Brandy story had his journalistic instincts howling like a fire siren. This isn't just local news anymore, Marcus explained, stirring coffee that looked thick enough to patch potholes. I've got state capital contacts who'll foam at the mouth over hedge funds targeting rural communities with fraudulent development schemes. But the real backbone of our operation was Chester's informal intelligence network. 60 years of friendships built on handshake deals and mutual respect. Dolores would monitor suspicious meetings over pie and coffee. Buck would track unusual equipment purchases. Mrs. Patterson would document every Google search Brandy made on library computers. The tactical foundation came straight from Chester's old Army engineering manual. Proper reconnaissance prevents piss-poor performance. Time to put that wisdom to work with some high-tech property surveying. I spent the next week learning Chester's surveying equipment, brass instruments that felt solid as church bells and twice as precise. YouTube University taught me what Chester's hands-on lessons had started, how to measure property boundaries with legal accuracy that would hold up in federal court. The strategy was beautiful in its simplicity. Conduct a comprehensive agricultural development survey using Chester's original boundary markers, then present it publicly as due diligence for expanding farming operations. Every measurement would be legally certified, every corner flag planted exactly where development would trigger the agricultural covenant. Chester's surveying Bible, leather-bound and dog-eared from decades of use, contained notes that read like military strategy. "Boundaries aren't suggestions, Riley," he'd scrawled in blue ink. "They're legal fortifications when surveyed right." Buck sourced professional-grade steel markers at cost, posts with reflective caps visible from low-orbit satellites. We planted them at dawn like we were marking a minefield, which, legally speaking, we were. The psychological warfare element was pure Chester brilliance. Let Brandy think she was winning while we documented every criminal move she made. Marcus coordinated his investigation timeline with our survey presentation. His newspaper expose would detonate the same day we revealed Brandy's identity fraud and financial schemes to a packed county meeting. Meanwhile, I installed recording devices along our property line, digital matchbox-sized units that were perfectly legal for protecting private land. Every conversation Brandy had with her development vultures while trespassing would be preserved in crystal-clear audio. The technical preparation felt like cramming for law school while learning bomb disposal. Property law, environmental regulations, surveying statutes, recording codes. Chester's bookshelf contained a legal arsenal he'd been stockpiling since before I was born. The real genius lay in understanding Brandy's fatal flaw. She couldn't resist pushing harder when victory seemed close. Every zoning challenge she filed, every development application she submitted, built stronger evidence of intent to violate the agricultural covenant. The smell of bright orange surveying paint mixed with October maple leaves as we marked boundaries that hadn't been officially verified since Chester's 1962 purchase. Each measurement confirmed what paperwork promised. Our property lines were exactly where Chester claimed, protected by laws older than Brandy's fake identity. Harlan coordinated with state environmental authorities to streamline land reversion procedures. "The state loves acquiring free parkland," he grinned like a shark spotting wounded prey, "especially when it comes with bulletproof legal protection against future development." Community mobilization happened organically, like morning coffee brewing itself. Buck rallied the VFW for volunteer property security during survey operations. Dolores spread word about our county presentation through her diner's communication network that rivaled CNN for speed and accuracy. Mrs. Patterson ensured local families understood what was really at stake, their community's soul versus corporate greed. By week's end, we had assembled the perfect storm: ironclad legal documentation, surveying evidence that would satisfy federal courts, coordinated media exposure, community support that felt like a warm blanket, and recorded proof of Brandy's fraudulent schemes. The texture of complete preparation feels different from desperate reaction, smoother, more confident, like the satisfaction of assembling a precision instrument designed for one perfect job. Chester had always preached that patience and preparation could defeat any enemy, no matter how well funded. Now I understood what 60 years of strategic thinking could accomplish when unleashed at exactly the right moment. Brandy wanted total war? Beautiful. But she was about to discover the difference between buying temporary influence and inheriting permanent wisdom. Game time. Brandy's desperation hit full-blown panic mode when she realized I wasn't backing down. Her first move was pure vandalism disguised as utility surveys. Suddenly, crews with official-looking hard hats were accidentally destroying our fencing while claiming to check power lines that hadn't needed maintenance since the Clinton administration. Chain-link posts got mysteriously bent, gate hinges disappeared overnight, and 100-year-old stone boundary markers somehow got relocated 50 feet onto our property. The smell of diesel exhaust and fresh paint from their fake utility trucks mixed with autumn air as these clowns pretended to work while actually documenting every inch of our land for Brandy's development plans. But the real gut punch came when county planning suddenly fast-tracked her rezoning application. A process that normally takes 6 months got compressed into 3 weeks. Clearly, somebody's palm had been greased with more than standard bureaucratic courtesy. Then Brandy launched her environmental warfare campaign that would have made a propaganda minister proud. She started spreading rumors that I was planning to sell Chester's land to a toxic waste company, posted fake environmental impact assessments on social media showing fictional pollution studies, even hired a guy in a hazmat suit to walk around our property line taking soil samples for her fabricated contamination investigation. The woman had evolved from scheming suburban princess to full-scale disinformation terrorist. But my trail cameras were capturing everything like a nature documentary about criminal behavior. The footage was better than reality TV. Brandy sneaking around at midnight with bleach bottles, dumping chemicals into Willow Creek to create her own evidence of agricultural pollution. Her fumbling around with a flashlight like some discount private investigator, measuring distances between our barn and the subdivision property line. The real jackpot came when I caught audio of her bribing County Inspector Williams with what sounded like campaign contributions for his upcoming election. $15,000 in exchange for favorable environmental findings and expedited permit approval. She actually said the words, "This conversation never happened," while standing on my property, being recorded by equipment she was too stupid to notice. Meanwhile, her public meltdown was providing free entertainment for half the county. Social media rants that got more unhinged daily, accusing me of everything from environmental terrorism to conspiring with outside agitators to destroy property values. The sound of her voice shrieking across the valley during phone calls to county officials became as regular as evening cricket songs. Her own neighbors started closing windows when she wound up for another tantrum about unfit inheritors threatening community safety. But the beautiful thing about small-town justice is that everybody knows everybody, and Brandy was burning bridges faster than Sherman marching through Georgia. Buck started documenting her purchases of industrial equipment that no legitimate homeowner would need, surveying flags by the hundreds, professional-grade soil testing kits, even portable concrete barriers for property protection. The woman was preparing for actual warfare. Dolores reported hushed conversations with men in expensive suits who paid for coffee with corporate credit cards. Planning commission meetings held in her diner's back booth at hours when honest people were home sleeping, Mrs. Patterson delivered the smoking gun, computer records showing Brandy researching federal environmental regulations, specifically how to manufacture evidence of agricultural contamination that would force emergency land seizure. She wasn't just trying to steal our land anymore, she was planning to frame Chester's legacy for crimes that existed only in her twisted imagination. My hidden recording equipment captured conversations that would have made the FBI's white-collar crime unit weep with joy. Development partners discussing falsified environmental reports, county officials coordinating inspection schedules that coincidentally aligned with Brandy's timeline, lawyers explaining how manufactured emergencies could bypass normal property protections. The texture of pure corruption feels slippery as snake oil, impossible to grab, but easy to document when you're patient enough. But what Brandy couldn't buy or threaten was what Chester had spent decades earning: genuine community respect. While she was trying to purchase influence with bribes and intimidation, I was inheriting relationships built on mutual aid and honest dealing. The VFW organized 24-hour property watches after her vandalism escalated. Local farmers started, coincidentally, driving by our gates during evening patrols. Even some subdivision residents began questioning whether their HOA queen was really protecting their interests. That support felt like Chester's old wool coat, rough around the edges but absolutely reliable when winter storms hit. By month's end, I had enough evidence to bury Brandy's schemes in federal prison, but Harlan convinced me to wait for the perfect moment. "Let her keep digging," he advised with a smile sharp as broken glass. "The deeper the hole, the harder the fall." She wanted to escalate? Perfect. But every criminal move she made was being documented, recorded, and preserved for the legal reckoning that was coming faster than a summer thunderstorm. The woman was building her own case for federal prosecution, one felony at a time. Brandy's final desperate moves proved that cornered animals really are the most dangerous. The first sign she'd completely lost her mind came at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday when my security cameras caught 3 guys with crowbars trying to break into Chester's old equipment barn. Not subtle about it either, their truck headlights blazing like they were loading hay instead of committing felony burglary. When I called out from the house with Chester's old hunting rifle visible in the porch light, they scattered like roaches when the kitchen light comes on. But not before my cameras got clear shots of their license plates and Brandy's pink Cadillac parked as a lookout vehicle down the road. The woman had graduated from legal harassment to hiring actual criminals. 2 days later, she tried to burn down Chester's barn. I was working late on survey calculations when the smoke detector started screaming like a banshee. Rushed outside to see orange flames licking at the barn's south wall, the smell of gasoline so strong it made my eyes water. If Chester hadn't installed that automatic sprinkler system back in the 90s, 60 years of family history would have gone up in smoke. Fire department responded faster than I'd ever seen, but the real evidence came from my security footage. Clear as daylight. Brandy's car parked behind the tree line at 1:47 a.m., her stumbling around with what looked like gas cans, the flash of ignition that started the whole mess. The woman had committed arson on camera while wearing that ridiculous pink blazer that made her visible from space. But somehow, and this part still makes my blood boil, the county sheriff's department needed more investigation before filing charges. Apparently, attempted murder of a property owner wasn't urgent enough for immediate arrest when the suspect had connections to development money. That's when Brandy made her final fatal mistake. She tried to frame me for insurance fraud. Using forged documents that looked like they'd been created by a drunk kindergartner, she filed complaints claiming I'd burned my own barn for insurance money. Submitted evidence to the state fire marshal suggesting I'd staged the arson to avoid property taxes. The forgeries were so bad they might as well have been written in crayon. Wrong dates, impossible signatures, insurance policy numbers that didn't exist. But the fact that she tried it at all showed how completely she'd lost touch with reality. Meanwhile, my community support network had evolved into something resembling a militia. The VFW organized round-the-clock property patrols that would have impressed the National Guard. Buck coordinated equipment loans so we could repair fire damage faster than any insurance adjuster expected. Dolores started serving free coffee to volunteers, turning barn reconstruction into the social event of the season. The texture of that community effort felt like Chester's old quilts, individual pieces that seemed small until you saw the whole pattern. But the real turning point came when Marcus Webb's investigation finally went public. His newspaper expose hit like a bomb going off in church. Front-page headlines, local HOA president's criminal past exposed, with sidebar stories about development fraud, identity theft, and connections to organized crime that made the whole county gasp over morning coffee. Marcus had traced Brandy's financial backing all the way to its source, a hedge fund with documented ties to money laundering operations in 3 states. The development company she'd been fronting wasn't just cutting corners. They were washing dirty money through rural real estate schemes. The FBI had already been investigating them for racketeering. Brandy had unknowingly made herself an accessory to federal crimes that carried decades in prison. The sound of federal agents parking outside her McMansion that Thursday morning carried across the valley like thunder before a storm. Black SUVs with government plates, men in suits who looked like they could bench press small buildings, search warrants that gave them permission to turn her fake palace inside out looking for evidence. Watching through binoculars from Chester's front porch, sipping coffee that tasted like victory, I saw Brandy's entire world collapse in real time. Her pink Cadillac got impounded, her bank accounts frozen, even her rented furniture loaded onto trucks bound for evidence warehouses. By evening, she was sitting in county lockup waiting for federal marshals to transport her to a facility that didn't offer wine service and fake-friendly HOA meetings. The smell of justice mixed with autumn leaves as I walked the property that evening, checking boundary markers that would never be threatened again. Every surveyor flag we'd planted stood like a small monument to Chester's strategic genius. But the most beautiful part was watching her subdivision neighbors finally understand what their HOA queen had really been planning. Property values would have been destroyed by her development scheme, not protected. Their rural lifestyle would have been paved over for golf courses and strip malls. They'd been supporting their own destruction, charmed by a criminal who saw them as useful idiots. Now they knew the truth, and they were mad as hell. The courthouse had never seen a crowd like this. Standing room only, with overflow spilling into the parking lot and people watching through windows, like it was the Super Bowl of small-town justice. County commissioners had scheduled an emergency meeting after the FBI investigation exploded across every news station in the state. Local TV crews set up cameras in the back, their bright lights making the old courthouse feel like a movie set. Federal agents sat in the front row, notepads ready, looking like they could arrest someone just by staring hard enough. And there was Brandy, slumping into a back row seat wearing dark sunglasses and a brown wig that fooled exactly nobody. The woman who'd once strutted around in pink blazers demanding everyone's attention was now trying to disappear into courthouse paneling. Too late for that, sweetheart. Commissioner Hayes called for order with his gavel, but the excitement buzzing through that room felt like electricity before a lightning strike. We're here to address recent allegations regarding development proposals and associated irregularities. That's bureaucrat speak for holy hell, what kind of criminal conspiracy was happening in our county? Harlan Becker stood first, carrying a folder thick as a phone book and wearing the kind of smile that made defense lawyers wet their pants. Honorable Commissioners, I represent the Thornfield estate, and we have evidence that will clarify recent misunderstandings. The projector screen lit up with security footage so clear it could have been a Hollywood production. There's Brandy at midnight dumping paint into Willow Creek. Close-up of her bribing County Inspector Williams with an envelope thick enough to choke a horse. Audio recording of her planning to frame Chester's legacy with manufactured environmental crimes. The gasps from the audience sounded like air being sucked out of a balloon. Ladies and gentlemen, Harlan continued, his voice carrying the authority of 60 years in courtrooms, you're watching attempted theft of a war veteran's property through fraud, environmental terrorism, and conspiracy with known money laundering operations. But the real bombshell came when he displayed Chester's 1962 agricultural covenant on that big screen. Any attempt to rezone this property triggers immediate reversion to state parkland. Mrs. Hutchwell's development scheme was not just criminal, it was legally impossible from day one. The silence in that courtroom was so complete you could hear dust settling on the windowsills. That's when Brandy completely lost what remained of her mind. She shot up from her seat like someone had lit her chair on fire, pointing her finger at me and screaming loud enough to wake graves 3 counties over. This is unfair! I've worked too hard to let some unfit city boy destroy years of planning. The federal agents perked up like hunting dogs catching a scent. I deserve compensation for my efforts. Your grandfather was just a squatter anyway. Nobody should own that much land when developers can put it to better use. Commissioner Hayes started banging his gavel like he was hammering nails, but Brandy was too far gone to stop. Do you have any idea how much money I've invested? How many promises I made to investors? I had guarantees from county officials. She'd just confessed to fraud, conspiracy, and bribery on live television. I stood up slowly, every eye in that packed courthouse focused on me, and delivered the line I'd been practicing since this whole nightmare started. Ma'am, I said, voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room, you just confessed to federal crimes on camera, but more importantly, you disrespected a war hero at his own funeral. In this county, we consider that unforgivable. The applause started as a rumble and built to thunder that shook courthouse windows. Standing ovation that went on so long, Commissioner Hayes gave up trying to restore order. Through the chaos, I watched federal agents walk toward Brandy with handcuffs that gleamed under those TV lights. Her pink Cadillac was being repossessed in the parking lot. Apparently, even her car payments had been made with stolen investor money. The sound of those handcuffs clicking shut was sweeter than spring rain on dry farmland. County Inspector Williams tried to slip out the back door, but federal marshals were waiting. Planning Commissioner Reynolds resigned effective immediately, probably hoping cooperation might reduce his prison sentence. Marcus Webb's cameras captured every moment for the next day's newspaper, which sold more copies than any edition in the paper's 100-year history. But the most beautiful sight was Dolores standing in the back with free apple pie for everyone who'd helped save Chester's land. Buck was already planning a memorial fishing tournament for the new state park. Mrs. Patterson had organized a letter-writing campaign thanking federal investigators. Chester's legacy wasn't just protected, it had become a rallying point for everything good about small-town values. Justice served with a side of apple pie, the way Chester would have wanted it. 6 months later, I'm sitting on Chester's porch swing, watching the sunrise over land that will never be threatened again. Coffee steaming in the crisp morning air when I get the call that makes everything perfect. "Riley," Harlan's voice crackles through the phone. "Brandy just got sentenced. 5 years federal prison, full restitution ordered. The judge called it one of the most brazen attempts at rural land theft he'd ever seen." Turns out federal judges don't appreciate criminals who target war veterans' legacies. County Inspector Williams got 3 years and lost his pension. Planning Commissioner Reynolds was banned from public office for life. The hedge fund she'd been fronting, under federal investigation in 12 states for money laundering through rural development schemes. But here's the sweet irony that would have made Chester laugh until his sides hurt. Brandy's own HOA neighbors voted to dissolve the association and incorporate their subdivision into the new state park system. Turns out they preferred conservation over the kind of development that attracts federal raids. The community healing happened faster than I expected. Some subdivision residents sold their houses and moved closer to town, but others embraced genuine rural living. They started gardens, learned about sustainable farming, even volunteered for the agricultural education programs we established on Chester's land. The smell of fresh lumber mixed with spring wildflowers as volunteers built the Chester Thornfield Memorial Conservation Center in the converted barn. Buck led the construction crew, all Vietnam veterans who worked for free because it's what Chester would have done. The conservation project became everything Chester had dreamed. 200 acres of public hiking trails winding through timber that had stood since before his grandfather was born. Educational programs teaching local kids about sustainable farming, water conservation, and the kind of land stewardship that built America. But the crown jewel was the scholarship fund we established with profits from selective timber harvesting. The Chester Thornfield Agricultural Scholarship gives full college funding to rural kids studying farming, conservation, or veterinary science. 25 students so far, each one carrying forward the values Chester had lived by. The Veterans Retreat program filled the gap left by Brandy's destruction. Converted barn became a peaceful space where combat veterans could find the same healing Chester had discovered in honest farm work. Fishing in Willow Creek, now running cleaner than ever, working with livestock, learning that land can restore souls as well as feed bodies. I never did move back to the city. Chester's farmhouse became home base for my expanded IT consulting business, serving clients from the same porch where he taught me life's most important lessons. Turns out, rural internet speeds had improved enough to run a tech business from anywhere. The texture of genuine peace feels different from the absence of conflict, warmer, more solid, like sitting in Chester's favorite chair that had molded itself to fit perfectly. Dolores expanded her diner with a Chester's Corner section featuring his favorite recipes and photos from 60 years of community involvement. Buck started offering guided tours of the conservation area, telling stories about Vietnam veterans who came home to build something lasting. Mrs. Patterson created a local history archive documenting how communities can protect themselves from outside exploitation. But the most satisfying update came last month when Marcus Webb won a state journalism award for his investigation into rural development fraud. His article series became required reading for FBI training programs about financial crimes targeting agricultural communities. The legal precedent from our case, Chester's Law they're calling it, has been cited in similar situations across 3 states. Agricultural covenants are now standard protection for family farms threatened by development pressure. Standing in Chester's garden this morning, hands dirty from planting vegetables that will feed the community center's programs, I can smell his pipe tobacco mixing with honest soil and growing things. The creak of his porch swing sounds like contentment itself. Chester had been right about patience, preparation, and the power of community standing together against bullies. His 60-year investment in relationships and legal protection had created something that would outlast us all. Got another inheritance story brewing? Wait until you hear about the woman who tried to steal her stepson's food truck empire with a forged death certificate and got schooled by a 19-year-old who'd learned everything about business law from YouTube University.